with that, we will get started. Thank you to everyone that has joined us tonight. And quick housekeeping note, we will be recording this video in case any neighbors or interested parties aren't able to join us. And we will be posting a link to that video on the Community Home Trust website. So if anybody wasn't able to make it, a neighbor that you tell about the meeting, please refer them to that, and they'll be able to find a link to the meeting from tonight. I'll start off by saying that tonight we are broadcasting in both English and Spanish. And so if anybody needs a translator into Spanish, there is a button at the bottom of your screen that will allow you to have a simultaneous Spanish-speaking interpreter that will be simultaneously broadcasting the information that we're sharing here tonight. So if you have any questions with that or any concerns, you can use the chat feature to email Danielle Berman with a question. And please feel free to do that or anything else that we run into tonight that is different than what you're typically used to. We're doing things just a little bit different tonight, but before we get into that, I wanted to just give everybody an overview of the meeting agenda. Again, my name is Dustin Mills, and I recognize many of the faces on from previous meetings. But tonight, yes.
Can I interrupt you for just 1 minute? We need to let our interpreter just real quick tell people what to do so they can switch over to the Spanish channel.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Bueno, buenas noches a todos. Esta reunión hoy está disponible en español y en inglés. Para escuchar el audio en español, por favor, haga clic en interpretación en la parte inferior de su pantalla. También puede optar por silenciar el audio original en inglés. Muchísimas gracias. Si tienen alguna pregunta, la pueden escribir en la cajita del chat. Thank you, Dustin, and thank you, Danielle.
Thank you. So tonight, if we can switch to the agenda slide, Danielle, just to give everybody some expectations of what we hope to accomplish tonight. You'll hear me mention this a couple of times throughout the evening, but as was a concern in the early stages, we want to reiterate that we still have a long road ahead of us in this process. And so this is one of multiple meetings that we have that are voluntary. And there will be also required meetings that have opportunities for public input. And we'll talk about that later, but you'll probably hear me restate that a couple of times because we're well in advance of being anywhere near beginning this particular development. So tonight, we just want to give everybody a brief overview. We're assuming that some individuals that are attending tonight may not have been to one of our previous meetings. So we're going to give a brief overview of the history and the goals of the J Street development. We're going to review the development process and timeline, talk about things we've done to date and things that are on the horizon for this particular development, and that will include opportunities for public input. We're going to look at the original concept plan that I know, again, recognizing some of you, I know you've seen before, but we have several other new plans that after receiving feedback in some of our previous meetings, we have come up with some alternative plans, and we'd like to seek your feedback on those here tonight. We're going to provide you with an engineering update that addresses some of the questions that were brought up in previous meetings about stormwater and road improvements that will be needed if this development were to move forward. And then we'll have a short break Q&A session where we try to address questions that were asked during the meeting. And then we're going to do something unique tonight. We're going to break up into small group format from 7 to 7:30, where you have two separate rooms that you'll be able to drop in. And in one room, Kimberly Sanchez and myself from Community Home Trust and I will be in a meeting room to talk about development. And then we'll have the architect and the engineer available for specific design questions that we felt like it was appropriate in case individuals didn't want to ask specific questions in this large group format. So with that, Danielle, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so again, I'm Dustin Mills. I'm with Taft Mills Group. We're the development team that was selected by the town of Chapel Hill to undertake the J Street affordable housing development. With me tonight on my team is Jonathan LaCourte with Taft Mills Group. And in addition to Jonathan is the architect on the development and will be able to answer any specific design questions that you might have. Tim Smith, who's with Summit Design and Engineering, will be again helping with any design questions. And Kimberly Sanchez, who is the Executive Director of Community Home Trust and who is our partner, our local partner in this development. And then from the town of Chapel Hill, we've got Nate Broman-Folks and Emily Holt, as well as Sarah Vinyas in attendance tonight if there are any municipal questions that need to be addressed. And the members of the town staff will be dispersed into the small group rooms, the breakout rooms at the end as well, in case any municipal comments or questions come up. This is a little bit different format than the last time, and we hope that it works well, but we've got a few other meetings ahead of us. So if it doesn't work well, we'll adapt and adjust moving forward. But here's the plan for tonight. We're going to do a quick presentation. We're going to go through all the items that we just went through on the agenda. And during the presentation, if a question pops up, feel free to direct message or direct chat with Danielle. She'll be monitoring those and will be keeping a record of the questions as we go through the process. We wanted to do that because we know that some of you have seen this plan before, but that's not the case with everybody that's in attendance tonight. So we wanted to provide kind of a snapshot of A to Z to date, with the benefit of not having, bringing up some of the previous stuff, because we hope that tonight you'll see a few things that maybe you've specifically brought up that we're attempting to come up with a feasible solution. And if not, then we can hear that feedback from once you've seen the alternative site plans, and we'll take that feedback into consideration in future meetings where we report back to you on what we've been able to accomplish based on tonight's feedback. So with that slide, we'll go to the next one, Danielle. So this is familiar to many of you, but I'm going to introduce Emily Holt, who is with the town of Chapel Hill, to just talk a little bit about how we got to where we are today and why we're having this meeting tonight. Emily?
Thank you, Dustin. I'm Emily. I'm the Affordable Housing Development Officer with the town. And like Dustin said, I'm just going to kind of bring us to where we are briefly so that we can get into the meat of talking about the plan and where we are. So I want to emphasize that while conversations started about this project 3 years ago, the development team really only began its planning and visioning process for this project back in March. So back when it did start in June of 2018, Council prioritized this parcel and several others for affordable housing development. And that was part of a broader strategy to try to expand the inventory of affordable housing in Chapel Hill by using town-owned land to do that. After that, the town staff worked with some outside consultants to look at the development potential of the site, confirm that what and if things could be built. And then we met back to council and provided an update on our findings, and they authorized us to identify a development partner. And so after issuing a request for proposals, we scored through 6 responses and ended up recommending that we enter into an agreement with Taft Mills Group and Community Home Trust. And at that point, we started our work, and that's when the concept plan application was submitted this past spring, and we kicked off our community engagement efforts, which is why we're here tonight, to continue that as we continue to refine and prepare the site plan. Next slide. So when we first got started with this particular parcel that had been prioritized for affordable housing, town staff established a set of goals for this site, for developing affordable housing on this site. And to walk through a few of those, the first was to look to provide affordable housing with a range of income levels, but prioritizing those at 60% or less of the area median income. We wanted to make sure that was affordable for the long term and that this project would leverage outside funding so it wasn't totally dependent on the town. In addition, some of the goals were to use environmentally friendly and sustainable development principles, and also to focus on ways to facilitate connections to really bring out a community feel within this development, but also to find ways to connect this community to the surrounding area, whether that's pedestrian or vehicular or bike. And those were the goals. So I'm going to pass it back to Dustin now to keep us going.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily. One of the things that we wanted to do tonight again is to take a quick peek back, and I'll be quick, but for the benefit of those who haven't been involved in the process from the early initial meetings. The most important thing that I think is worth mentioning is the primary resource for getting regular updates for this particular project is on the Community Home Trust's website. And this is a link, Danielle has provided a clickable link in the chat box in case you need to access that directly. But this is frequently asked questions. A video of this presentation will be linked there. Everything that that we can come up with that we have that we want to provide publicly will be there. Questions that are asked in some previous meetings, questions that we've received directly to town council or to town staff. We typically try to be prompt in our response in addressing those questions, and then we publish them for the benefit of the greater group, because chances are others have the same questions. So that's the primary resource that we point you to for all things J Street as we continue to move forward through the process. So just as many of you recall, back in April, we had our initial neighborhood meeting. That's where we started to get feedback on, comments, questions, or concerns about this proposed development. We stated it back then. I'll restate it again. Our objective as the developer is to understand what the concerns are, understand what the objectives of the town is for the site, and to figure out some type of way to come up with something that meets as many of those objectives as is possible. And that's why we're here tonight, and we'll continue to be here for many points of outreach in the future. We did appear before the Community Design Commission and the HAB, Housing Advisory Board. We had another Village West, our first Village West HOA meeting back in May. We met with the Compass Group in May as well. And then we had the Public Housing Resident Council meeting, and we appeared before Town Council on the 21st of June. None of those dates that you see resulted in any vote. They were informational overall, and as will many of the future ones that you'll see on the next slide. So with that, Danielle, we'll switch to the next slide. So the items that you see here, and I kind of need to go through these, but I'll be quick because one of the big issues that we found we have received feedback on was that traffic was of concern in this area. And so a traffic, what we call a TIA, a traffic impact analysis, has been initiated. We hope to have those findings in either late this month or early November. That report will be made public. And I think it's worth noting that the firm that we used was the firm recommended and directed to us by the town of Chapel Hill. It is a unbiased third party that we did not select. One of the other items that was brought to our attention was, are you guys going to go to the Stormwater Management Advisory Board? We looked into that, and that typically happens later in the development process. But in an effort to kind of address the concerns, we and Tim with the engineering team, we'll talk a little bit more about it later in the presentation, but we anticipate appearing before the Stormwater Advisory Board on October 26th. The items, that's our first item in red. And so the items that are in red tonight are representative of opportunities for outside of these voluntary meetings for you as the general public or an interested party or concerned neighbor to provide input in a public format. We hope that when this is all said and done, you see as the developer and potential owner of this development in the future that we can address as many of the concerns, but certainly encourage for you to make any of your concerns known, not only to us directly, but publicly, because we feel like when it's when we get in front of council, probably sometime mid next year, we will be in a position to say, here are our major concerns that were addressed, and here are the item or major concerns, and is how we address those particular items. So skip over a couple. We're going to do a conditional zoning application late November. There'll be a public information meeting tied to that. In January, we will start beginning to seek financing from the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, which is the mechanism financially that allows us to make this affordable community that is geared towards workforce individuals. In March and April, as part of that process of the zoning, we will go back before the advisory boards. There'll be a public hearing, and then ultimately a town council vote that is tied to the rezoning of the parcel to allow for this development to proceed. We won't find out about funding from the Housing Finance Agency until August of 2022. So a little less than a year from now. And then the municipal approval process takes quite a bit of time in the town of Chapel Hill. And so if everything happened perfectly, we would not begin construction on this development, on the J Street development, until June of 2023. And it would take, the better part of a year to 14 months to build the development. And so for purposes of, there being an active operating development, we wouldn't anticipate units being available until August of 2024. So again, just to reiterate, and this will be on the Community Home Trust website for your review in case you weren't able to screen grab it tonight, or you couldn't, make notes before we moved on to the next slide. The red items are opportunities for additional public input. All right, Danielle. So tonight, the next phase of what we'd like to do is we're going to talk about some alternative plans that we feel like we were able to come up with based on the feedback that we received from some of our initial meetings with neighbors and interested parties. And as I said earlier, we're summarizing what some of the feedback was that you will see addressed either in this presentation or in the plans that that we'll be presenting to you for review and consideration. But traffic and road improvements were one of the main concerns, and we will be sharing the TIA in late this month, early next month. And that will give some indication. The goal for that is to give some indication as to what type of traffic would be generated from a development of this size, approximately 48 units. And again, it'll be released publicly for any and everybody to review. As I said earlier, we're going to appear before the Stormwater Management Advisory Board. We have Tim Smith doing a plan that gives a snapshot of what the design would look like should this development move forward. And he'll receive feedback from that board on areas of concern or areas for improvement once he has proposed that development, that design as it pertains to the development. And then from a staff standpoint, quite a few inquiries were made by concerned residents, just asking questions. And so anytime those questions are asked of either town council members or staff members, they do their very best to provide a detailed response. And then when they do provide those responses, as I've said previously, we share those on the frequently asked page, questions page. And then finally, what we're getting ready to transition into is the alternative plans. And these are just a couple of things that we captured. I'm not going to read through all of them, but some of the high level ones were, we wanted to pull people into the community. They wanted to make sure that there was a tenured branch trail connection. Pedestrian access and safety was a big concern. We heard about traffic. We heard about parking, all sorts of things. So if we can go to the next slide. So, yep, thank you. So this is the plan that we originally submitted as part of our response to the RFP to the town of Chapel Hill. And this is the plan that most of you have seen if you've participated previously. But for the ones that haven't, this is a 2 residential building plan And there's a clubhouse that's centralized that has a leasing office and a playground, and the clubhouse for resident use, and has about 95 parking spaces. There's been some debate as if that is too much or too few, and so we'll continue to address that. Although the plan doesn't show up because it's our original plan, we are representing here publicly in a public format that, this development plan, if it were to move forward, would have 2 separate and independent trash dumpster locations, because I understand that's a concern. And it does, on the southern portion of this site, have access to the Tanyard Branch Trail and a parking area for individuals who may want to have that access but don't necessarily live in the community. And one of the big things that we've heard that individuals like about this plan is that it preserves about 50% of the total parcel. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. This is the rendering that we have proposed. There will be tweaks made here and there, but generally speaking, this is what you would typically associate with a garden style development. This is consistent with what is on the plan that we just previously showed. I have the porch and patio area highlighted because that was one of the things that we received feedback, was that and a resident wanted to see in the building an opportunity for the individual units to have their own exterior space. So that's our opportunity to activate that particular unit, and that's what you see in this particular design. So just again, sharing this with the group for the greater good from a elevation standpoint. Next slide. And again, some of you have seen this before, but this is a rendering to give a point of perspective of that Plan A, the initial plan, and how it relates to things like a buffer surrounding the site, its proximity to Village West townhomes and the other homes that in this picture kind of due west of the property. And then we'll go to the next slide, which gives just a different perspective. This is looking from the railroad track side towards Village West, so that you can see kind of the buffer that separates this particular development and J Street, which then separates us from the Village West townhomes. All right, next slide. So this is going to look similar because it's a similar format, but this is what we're calling alternate Plan B. And this is the point in the presentation where I would encourage you, as we talk through these items, this is where if you like something about this plan or dislike something about this plan, if you would in the chat, just go Plan B, I love the building, or I don't like the placement of the parking lot, something along those lines. And again, that will provide us with direct feedback that we can then look into for future iterations that we will be sharing. So in this plan, total of 50 units, and it is 2 residential buildings, which is very similar to what was the case in Plan A. But the difference is, if you'll notice, we lost the clubhouse in this plan. And we were able to lose the clubhouse because we integrated it into the actual building itself, and effectively made it a component of the residential building. So we withdrew the clubhouse that created the opportunity to save some additional space. And this is the plan that preserves the most acreage on the site, but not by a lot, just a little bit compared to Plan A. Parking spaces, that will ultimately be determined by the municipality, but we're providing a point of reference, about 1.86 spaces per unit here. And if you'll note that one of some of the feedback that we received was that the buildings were too close to the Village West townhomes. And so this plan contemplates putting the parking up closer to J Street and creating almost like a courtyard type setting between the building to the north and the building to the south, where you can see a square box right by the letter E that shows where the playground is, and that's also the office, the entry to the integrated office. And again, this has 2 trash dumpsters, direct access to the Tanya Branch Trail. And as I said, this is, one of the ones that preserves the most amount of undeveloped land. All right, we'll go to the next one. Okay, so on this particular development, this particular option, we went away from a multi-building concept and we went towards a single building concept. And if you can picture this in your head, there are entry points in this particular building that allow for individuals to come into a centralized entry where there's the leasing office and the community room and things like your mail kiosks and stuff like that. And then they enter into what we call an interior loaded corridor. So similar to a hotel, for example, where you enter into a main point of ingress egress, and then you walk to your unit in an interior corridor. And so what this does is it takes away the multiple building footprints. It from a true footprint standpoint, we feel like it takes up a good bit of space, and the scale's a little different than what we would prefer to propose in the plans that hopefully will get approved and get neighbor buy-in. Again, a little fewer spaces in this. We probably have to clean that up a little bit, but that's what this particular plan shows. Dumpster and trash areas are addressed, access to Tanya Branch Trail. And it's the smallest footprint for the total amount of units that are provided, but it still pushes in slightly further south down into the area that we're trying to preserve as undeveloped. And then one of the things that it did create, which we liked, was access to Tanya Branch Trail will be required as a given, and we think it's an amenity to our residents and to the general public who use the Tanya Branch Trail. But the present location of the trail, parking is limited, and so we like the fact that this particular plan has opportunities for us to provide our outside amenities like our playground and areas for seating and some picnic shelter are down integrated into the point of ingress egress for the Tanya Branch Trail. So this is a plan that we think has some pluses and minuses as well. And again, just to reiterate, I encourage you as we go through these to make comments specific to the reference plan, which this one is C, the previous one was B, and the initial one was A. All right, next slide. And then so this is our final plan that we proposed. And personally, my least favorite of all of them, and the reason why is, there are definitely some pros, and I'll address those, but we came up with this plan because some of the feedback that we received was, why did the buildings have to have so many units? 2 buildings with 24 units each, totaling 48 units. Can't you come up with something smaller? And we looked at a townhome concept that we couldn't get anywhere near the amount of units that we would need in the 48 to 50 range that we would need to make it feasible. And this particular design, we could still do it. We could have 48 units as we've talked about from the get-go, and we would accomplish that by just deleting the southernmost building. And that building location is problematic in general just because of the topo of the site. But this is just a snapshot of what it looks like to have the community building up closer to the entry point and to have smaller buildings, but more footprint taken up. And this is similar in design, scope, and layout to the first and second plan, but it just has a lot more building footprints. And personally, our preference would be to come up with a concept that has just the 2 residential buildings, and whether or not we would integrate the clubhouse or leave it a standalone is yet to be determined. And again, your feedback will help drive that. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. And I'm going to take a quick break and let Tim Smith talk a little bit about engineering and where we are with that. Tim?
Sure. Thanks, Dustin. Yes, my name's Tim Smith. I'm a civil engineer and land surveyor. I work with Summit Design and Engineering out of the Hillsborough office, just north of Chapel Hill. So just a few quick updates on the work we've done so far to dig into some of these issues that we'd heard on the earlier meetings. I'll start with the first one being J Street itself. I put this slide up here to give an overview of where J Street is currently and how it comes into this property or adjacent to this property. So we have started talking to the engineering staff with the town of Chapel Hill. They have indicated initially that they would be looking for a improvement to J Street to be a 26-foot wide pavement. We would probably have curb and gutter in addition to that, but they represented that number in conjunction with fire truck access and what would be needed to serve this property and others down J Street. So that's our initial conversation. We're still working with them to further determine, what the ultimate street improvements would be. That would also be in conjunction with the results of the TIA when that information becomes available. That'll be combined with, the information that the engineering staff is looking for to make a final determination on the road improvements. One thing to note, so part of the road in front of our property is within a public street easement right of way. Where you see J Street that turns north actually runs through the property that the town owns, that is the cemetery. So there'll be some work we'll need to do with the town to see how they want to handle the improvements across that portion of the property that we don't control. So those are the initial steps we've taken on looking at J Street itself. We do know that improvements will need to be made. And also with that, more than likely, or we would probably include a sidewalk to get pedestrian access back out to Village Drive, which is where some of the bus stop locations are located. Jumping down to stormwater management. So, Dustin went over the various alternative plans that we may be looking at. Ultimately, we'll settle on a final plan. And once that is determined, we'll figure out more specifically what we'll be looking at for placement and control of stormwater runoff. As Dustin mentioned, we will be going before the Stormwater Advisory Board at the end of October on the 26th. So prior to that, we will have a plan, at least conceptual design for stormwater management that we will take and present to the Stormwater Advisory Board. So we'll continue to work on that and develop that plan and get the feedback from the Stormwater Advisory Board, which will then help us, make a determination of any changes that need to be made and where we would end up with our final design. At this time, based on the topography, we anticipate some of the management would be actually underground, probably under our parking lot areas. And then some may be at the southern end of the site before you get to the stream buffer. So segueing into stream buffers. So the town of Chapel Hill does their own stream determinations to determine what is a stream or what is not, or what level of the stream it is. But because this is a town project and is located within the Jordan watershed drainage area, we are required to also get a second determination done from the state for stream determination on the property. So I'm meeting with the state representative from the Division of Water Resources this Thursday morning to meet at the site, walk the site, and have them do their determination of the stream, which would then reflect what the associated buffers would need to be in conjunction with that. So we'll have that information in hand very soon. We meet on Thursday, and I'm sure they'll provide their report and determination, shortly thereafter. And then lastly, on site grading, Dustin mentioned this in the various alternative plans that we are looking at. The site does slope from west to east, from the railroad track side to the east. There is a fair amount of topographic relief on the site that we'll need to address. And that is being looked at both from a site perspective, but also from the building design perspective to integrate the design and elevations of the buildings to fit within that topography and provide the best solution for grading and the need for any retaining walls. So that also will be determined, ultimately, once we know what our final plan is going to look like. So we're looking to receive your feedback on the different alternatives that Dustin presented tonight.
Okay. I think it looks like, thank you, Tim. We are looking like we're slightly ahead of schedule on our agenda, which is good. We will use the balance of the time from now until 7 o'clock to answer questions. And we're doing it a little differently. We're asking that you submit your questions in the chat box to Danielle, and Danielle is going to act as a moderator. And Danielle, if you'll, ask questions in the order that you receive them, and I will try my very best to not be long-winded so that we can ask and be asked and answer as many questions as is possible. And then as a reminder, at 7 o'clock, we're going to break out into small group discussions that will go from 7 to 7:30. And so if your question doesn't get answered in this forum, please feel free to go into a room with the specific individuals that you would like to ask the question of, and we'll try our best to address those questions. And if at 7:30, when we end the meeting, your question didn't get addressed in either of the two forums, feel free to email us through the Community Home Trust website, and we will attempt to respond accordingly. So with that, Danielle, I'll let you ask the first question, and then I'll make my best effort to attempt to determine who's the best person to address that question.
Okay, so first question is, how did dedicated green space voted on by citizens turn into development?
I will defer that to either Nate or Emily, because I know that's a question that's been previously asked, and there was a response from the town's perspective. Emily or Nate, would either of you?
Sure. Yeah, this is, as Dustin said, a question we've answered, and I think is in the FAQs. And Emily, whenever the process the town went through to prioritize the site and select the development partner. So affordable housing is a top priority for the town council. It's one of the strategic objectives, and so utilizing town land for affordable housing development was something that council asked staff to look into and come with some options for sites that could be developed on. And so we went through the process that Emily ran through, and council decided to prioritize this site for affordable housing development.
Thank you, Nate. And to Nate's point, the response that was provided by town staff in regards to that specific question is on the FAQ, and Danielle has provided that link, I think, several times throughout the evening in the chat function. Okay. Danielle,
next question. Yeah, next question. A couple of people have asked about green solutions such as permeable pavers, solar power, and other green solutions.
Okay. So on that question, I'm going to ask Jonathan LaCourte to provide some feedback. As a reminder, Jonathan is the architect of the development that works for our organization and is skilled in the design of green features. Jonathan?
Sure. Those are all things that are very important to us. We like to look at the green elements of a project sort of holistically. With it being affordable housing, we want to make sure we get the most bang for our buck, but we will definitely have a very tuned look at all types of green features, including low flow plumbing, just really every aspect of the building will be looked at for that, with that in mind.
And to add to that point, when we secure our financing through the Housing Finance Agency, they typically provide some specific direction in an effort to be more green. And then we will work with the town to address any requirements from their standpoint municipally as well. Danielle?
Question about whether the project will be going before the Transportation and Connectivity Advisory Board.
I saw Emily shaking her head. Emily?
Yes, that's one of the, I think it's 5 or 6 advisory boards that review every development application that comes through the town. So that's likely to be that set of reviews, probably, I'm guessing March, April.
Okay,
thanks,
and
Troy.
can you explain what provisional zoning is?
So I'll take a stab at that, and then Nate or Emily, if you'll be prepared to correct me if I misstate anything, but I believe the question is tied to conditional zoning. But in general, conditional zoning is, municipally speaking, it is allowed in some towns and is not allowed in others, or not provide, it's not part of their process. But generally speaking, conditional zoning is specific to what you are proposing, and it is specific to the plan that you make subject to your zoning application. So for example, just generally speaking, if we did a 48 unit layout and got it rezoned for multifamily, as I understand it, and has been my experience in other municipalities, we couldn't then come in and do a 82 unit development under that same zoning classification. So beyond that, I'll ask staff if they have any additions to that question.
I would just add that it's different than regular zoning, where it focuses on a certain use per acre. So, R2 is X units per acre. It's more flexible. So it's really looking at there's more flexibility in what you can propose, and your approval is based on kind of a up to. So you can have up to 50 units or up to this many parking spaces. And I think the key thing is that it's flexible rather than defined by certain density parameters.
And
Now,
Emily, I'm sorry, Nate, go ahead.
I'll add that there are a couple of different ways to get a rezoning. Typically in Chapel Hill, one is through a special use permit process where you get a rezoning and then a special use permit. And then the conditional zoning is one where you are able to do community engagement and have conversations with the community and council and interested parties throughout that rezoning process. Whereas if the development team was to submit a special use permit application, that's actually what's called a quasi judicial process, and you cannot have those conversations. So part of the reason for going the conditional zoning route is to allow for more robust community engagement throughout the process.
Thank you, Nate. And one thing that I think, based on my experience in municipalities that don't have the conditional rezoning request, is those instances you are requesting, as Emily pointed out earlier, just a zoning classification that may have 50 different uses under that classification. On this one, and as an applicant, we don't have the benefit of saying, look, this is what we'd like to do. This is what we want to publicly promote that we're doing. And in conditional zoning, you are allowed that. As the applicant, we can say, we'd like to do about 50 affordable housing units. This is, generally speaking, the layout that we are anticipating. And so it provides a little more flexibility to, like Nate said, to engage with the public and talk specifics about what will be there, what it'll look like, what the scale will feel like when the development's completed. Danielle?
The next question, we had several questions about the alternative plans, about how many stories the buildings will be. So the original design showed 3 stories, but questions about with those alternatives, whether they would also be 3 stories or whether that would change.
Yeah, Jonathan, I'm going to ask you to provide basis of comparison from Plan A, which is the initial concept plan, and then just generally speaking, what the balance of those new concept plans are from a height standpoint.
Is it possible, Danielle, you could go back to those slides and flip through them? And start with start with the A. Yes, thank you. So this was 2 3-story apartment buildings and 1 single-story, the office building. The height is roughly 40 feet from the ground to the very top of those buildings. If you go to the next slide. The building on the top there closest to J Street is still 3 stories. The building to the south of that, as part of integrating the office building into that footprint, and due to the grades, created a retaining wall condition that goes through the middle of the building. So it's now a 3-story building on one half of it, close to the railroad, and a 4-story building on the other half facing east. The road in this scenario is about half a story above the bottom of the building, and the buildings would be accessed with roughly a bridge, if you want to call it that. So in height, from the uppermost point, it's a little bit taller, but visually it'll feel roughly the same as a 3-story building because part of it's recessed, if that makes sense. The next slide, this building, the uppermost portion of that building, from the B with a circle in it and the A with a circle in it, those sections of the building are 3 stories. And again, due to grade, that the C section of the building is 3 stories facing the railroad and 4 stories facing the east. This alternate D, all of those buildings the apartment buildings are 3 stories, and the office building is 1 story.
Okay.
The next group of questions, there were several questions about density and numbers of units. And so with the alternate plans, there are differing numbers of units. And so can you talk about sort of how the number of units in each plan were determined?
Sure. So our initial goal was a plan that contemplated, and that was Plan A, 48 total units. And I've said this previously in earlier meetings, but that is about where we absolutely have to be for the deal to make financial sense to move forward. There are things like economies of scale when you build buildings that it doesn't work when you build smaller, less units. But we're also, typically 48 units based on our company's experiences. In fact, that will be the smallest affordable development that we have done to date. You typically see affordable developments in the 80 unit range. And so this is, significantly less than that. From a density standpoint, I think definitionally, if you use 48 units, it's upper low to lower moderate density from a multifamily standpoint. And the differential in units is not necessarily an attempt for us to get more units. It is when Jonathan is working on the plan, for example, he said in the earlier plan, there was a portion of the building that was 3 stories and a portion that was 4 stories because of grading. And so when he's designing that, he can't, if he's designing a floor, he doesn't have the ability to just stop it at one point if there's, a floor above it to get to exactly 48. So when we're looking at these different footprints, like the single building, for example, he can stop it at the end of the building. That was the single building that had the integrated clubhouse. He could theoretically stop it at the end, but any time he stops it, he's not cutting off one unit, he's cutting off, 2, 4, 6, however many, there's a unit on either side of the corridor, and then however many stories there are at that point in time. So it's just a function of how the building units lay out and where we, put them on the site, and how they function as far as access to parking and interaction with topography and all that sort of stuff. So there's no exact science to it. It's kind of, let's figure out what type of buildings could we come up with as alternatives based on the feedback that we received from the public, and how do those units shake out. But I think that I'm right in that I think the maximum units in this plan that we showed was, I think, 60 units. So we're really only at the top about 12 units higher than what, is our primary goal.
Next question, and we probably need to move a little more quickly through these to make sure we get through as many as possible. What is the plan for lighting the project at night?
Jonathan or Tim, which one?
Either one. I'll say there's, depending on feedback, we typically we like to light the parking lots with site lighting pole, a mix of either site lighting poles or lighting on the building. We try to pay particular attention to the foot candle or the amount of light that's on the property line so that it doesn't spill on the neighbor's property. And we try to reduce glare within our property. So we use kind of a mixture of strategies with those things in mind, trying to light the parking and reduce the flow onto adjacent properties and to reduce glare.
And just as a quick anecdotal response to that, we completed a development in Winston-Salem about a year ago. And the main point of concern from the neighbors was, light flooding in, light pollution. We worked with Duke Power to come up with a lighting plan that really focused on downward lighting. And we haven't had, we've been in operation for about a year now, haven't had one complaint. So it's a delicate balance between wanting to provide a secure and safe parking lot and allow our residents to get to the building safely, but also wanting to be a good neighbor. And we don't want to be in operation and get constant complaints about the lighting causing, our neighbors not to be able to enjoy their space. So we're sensitive to that. Danielle?
We have several questions about parking, where the parking areas are and how the numbers of parking spaces are determined.
Yeah, so the parking is, again, an inexact science when in this particular plan, but as we get closer to getting a plan that will be presented to the town staff will have a maximum parking threshold. The North Carolina Housing Finance Agency that we are seeking our financing from typically will concede to what the municipal guidelines are. And so our goal as an owner is to always provide sufficient parking, because the last thing we want to do is have residents complain that they come home at night and the parking lot's lit properly and they can't find a parking spot. And so that's our goal, is a delicate balance between not providing too much parking or unnecessary parking, because that's just impervious space that we don't want to have to deal with from an environmental standpoint, and the delicate balance between the municipal requirements. But what I can tell you, when it's all said and done, we will adhere to the municipal requirements as part of the process for review and approval.
We have several questions about the buffer between this development and Village West, and maybe we can lump that together too with just questions about the topography generally and access to the tenured branch trail, trees, all sorts of same concerns.
Yeah, Danielle, if you'll switch back to the photo aerial with the renderings from the railroad, yes, that one. I think that this, first of all, let me state that there will be a buffer, a natural buffer, and that will be undisturbed around the entire perimeter of the developable area. It will meet or exceed the requirements from the town of Chapel Hill. And that's why I think that this is such a critical visual of what we anticipate this community looking like. Because from our standpoint, there's a decent amount of trees in between us and J Street. And in fact, when we looked at it, we feel like because of the thickness of those trees and that they exist and are plush, we feel like we will have more than what is presently, in between J Street and the Village West townhomes that you see just to the north of this property. And so we will adhere to all municipal standards. The Tanyard Branch Trail will be required to make connectivity. We want it as an amenity, and we are making it available to the general public. And so we think that it's mutually beneficial. Danielle, you mentioned one other item I can't recall. We talked about the buffer. We talked about Tanyard Branch Trail.
I'm not sure anymore.
Okay, well, that's okay.
Sorry.
We'll move on to the next question. And if I didn't capture one of the components that somebody asked the question, feel free to resubmit it.
Justin, was it topography?
Yes,
Oh,
thank you.
topography, that's right.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So when you saw, if you'll go up to the Plan B, Danielle, in this particular one, in the southernmost building where you see a C with a circle and a B, the one with the dark black line going through vertically the middle of that building. The reason that that black line is a retaining wall, and that's our treatment of topography. So that there's a reason why the building on one side is 3 stories and on the other side is 4 stories and has these little bridges from the parking lot into the corridor of the apartment building. And so as we get further south, the topography gets even more challenging. But generally speaking, we're able to design around that. And quite honestly, we feel like it's a plan that will be aesthetically pleasing in general and based on any of the plans, because when you come into the site, it's not just a flat site like you see in some instances, and there'll be some character to the site and to the buildings and how the buildings interact with the area surrounding it.
Okay, I think one more question while we're here in this large group before the breakout rooms. We've had several people ask about the number of units that will be at different AMI levels. So how many will be at 30%, 40%, 50%, et cetera?
Yeah. So what I can tell you is that will be public information as soon as we know exactly what that makeup is. And for the benefit of the group, because this is a workforce housing development and we are seeking tax credits, it is geared towards individuals who make between a certain minimum income and a maximum income. And it's meant to provide high quality, affordable housing in a market like Chapel Hill, where affordable housing is not as easy to obtain as it is in some other municipalities. But generally speaking, we will have a mix that primarily, I'd say the majority of the units are up closer to the 60% range. And then we will have some in the 30% range. There'll be a little bit scattered in between, but for the most part, when we release the targeted rents, they will be targeting individuals in the 30% and some in the 60% range. There are opportunities to look at some that pop up into the 80% range, but we don't know if we'll want to go with that at this particular point in time. So more to come on that, but very good question and a relevant question. So with that, I think we're now at 7 o'clock on the dot.